Hello and welcome back to the Quiet Hours. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the world outside fade away. I'm curious, as always, to know when and where you're listening from tonight. What hour is it for you? And what corner of the world are you in? It's fascinating to me to imagine this single story weaving its way through countless different nights, in countless different places. A shared moment of stillness in a busy world. Leave me a comment below with your time and location. And of course, if you enjoy these long, dark nights with us, a simple like and a subscription helps this channel reach other listeners, just like you, searching for a story in the dark. Now, let us begin. First story, The Lamplighter's Log. The Lamplighter's Log. My name is Elias Thorne, and this is my first entry into what I suppose you could call a personal audio diary. I'm recording this from the North Point Lighthouse, a structure that has stood sentinel on this desolate rock for over a century. My predecessor, a man named Arthur Finch, vanished from this very spot 3 weeks ago. No trace, just an empty, pristine lighthouse and a single, leather-bound logbook left on his desk. The Coast Guard concluded it was likely a rogue wave, a slip, or perhaps even a deliberate act, though they couldn't find a single shred of evidence to support any of those theories. They packed up his personal effects, ran their diagnostics on the automated systems, and then, with a shrug that spoke volumes, they left. And I arrived. My job here is, in theory, simple. This lighthouse is fully automated, a marvel of modern engineering wrapped in historical stone. My role is merely that of a caretaker, a presence. I monitor the systems, ensure the generators are running smoothly, perform routine maintenance, and log the weather. It's a quiet existence, perfectly suited to my temperament. I've always found solace in solitude, in the rhythmic predictability of mechanical things, the constant shriek of the wind outside, the ceaseless crash of waves against the rock, the low, steady hum of the generator in the basement. These are my companions. They are predictable, comforting in their relentless constancy. For the first few days, I settled into the routine. The silence, broken only by the elements and the machinery, was profound. I explored the lighthouse, from the damp, echoing depths of the generator room to the dizzying heights of the lantern room, where the massive, automated lamp swept its powerful beam across the churning expanse of the Atlantic every 10 seconds. It was a beautiful, majestic light, a beacon of safety, a silent promise to any vessel navigating these treacherous waters. It was on the 4th evening that I found myself drawn to Arthur Finch's logbook. It sat on the desk in the small, Spartan office, a relic in an otherwise modern setting. I'd avoided it initially, out of a strange sense of respect, or perhaps a subconscious reluctance to delve into the last thoughts of a man who had simply ceased to be. But curiosity, as it always does, eventually won. The first few pages were exactly as the Coast Guard had described: meticulous, mundane. Dates, times, weather observations, fuel levels, generator run times. Finch had a neat, almost spidery handwriting, each entry precise, professional. June 1st, routine checks complete. Generator operating within parameters. Wind 15 knots, WNW. Sea state moderate. June 3rd, minor sensor recalibration performed on automated lens rotation. heavy fog expected overnight. June 7th, resupply vessel arrived on schedule. Provisions stored. No anomalies. I read through days, then weeks of these entries. They painted a picture of a dedicated, ordinary man performing an ordinary job. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, to suggest the bizarre circumstances of his disappearance. I found myself almost disappointed, having perhaps hoped for some dramatic revelation, some clue to the mystery that had brought me here. Then the tone began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a faint tremor beneath the surface of a calm sea. The entries remained factual, but a new, almost poetic language started to creep in. July 12th, storm front approaching. Wind rising to 30 knots. The light, it feels alive tonight. A pulse against the darkness. July 15th, the generator's hum is a lullaby. The waves, a whispered conversation. And the light, it speaks. I wonder, does anything speak back? I paused, frowning. Speaks back, I muttered to myself. It was a strange turn of phrase for a professional log. I dismissed it as a momentary flight of fancy, the kind of introspection that prolonged isolation can sometimes induce. We all talk to ourselves out here, to the walls, to the sea. It's a coping mechanism, but the entries grew stranger. Finch's handwriting, once so neat, became a little less controlled, the lines sometimes wavering. July 20th, the beam. It is not merely a warning. It is a question, a call. I feel it in the very core of this stone tower. A question posed to the vast, cold depths. My brow furrowed deeper. This was more than just poetic musing. This was odd. I could almost hear the wind outside, a mournful wail that seemed to underscore the growing unease in Finch's words. I continued reading, the rhythmic crash of the waves against the rock, now seeming less comforting, more insistent. July 25th, I saw it again. Faint, so faint. A flicker beneath the surface, miles out. A response. It was there, then gone. A trick of the eye, perhaps, or the mind. But I felt it. A cold light. Cold light. My breath hitched slightly. This was where the rationalizations began to crumble. Finch was describing something beyond the natural, something that defied the logical, automated world of the lighthouse. I told myself it was the isolation, the relentless monotony, the sheer, crushing weight of being utterly alone on a rock in the middle of a vast ocean. It could make a man see things, hear things. It could make him believe in impossible answers to impossible questions. The next few entries were increasingly erratic. The dates were sometimes missing, the sentences fragmented, almost frantic. August 1st, they answer. The patterns, they are complex, not random, not natural. The light, it is not ours. It is a dialogue, and I am listening. August 3rd, the hum of the generator, it changes. A subtle shift in pitch. It's not just powering the light. It's fueling the conversation. I must understand. I must record. August 5th, the beam, it is reaching. Deeper, they are closer. I feel their presence. Cold, ancient. They are waiting for the right sequence, the right key. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The comfortable hum of the generator from below now seemed different. Was it my imagination, or had its pitch truly shifted, ever so slightly? I strained my ears over the howl of the wind, trying to discern a change, a nuance that wasn't there before. The silence that followed the sweep of the light seemed heavier, more profound. The last entry in the logbook was dated August 7th, 2 days before Finch's disappearance. The handwriting was almost illegible, scrawled across the page as if written in a desperate hurry. August 7th. It knows, the light it knows. It is no longer automated. It has learned. It has chosen. The sequence, it is not mine. It is theirs. And they are here, so cold, so close. That was it, the final words. So cold, so close. I closed the logbook, the leather feeling strangely warm in my hands, as if still imbued with the frantic energy of its last writer. I tried to shake off the creeping dread, the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was madness, pure and simple. Isolation-induced psychosis. Finch had clearly succumbed to the crushing loneliness of this place, his mind creating elaborate delusions to fill the void. The lighthouse, the sea, the generator, they were just inanimate objects, governed by physics and programming. There was no conversation, no cold light answering back. I stood up, walked to the window, and peered out into the gathering twilight. The lighthouse beam swept across the ocean, a comforting, familiar rhythm. 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. A steady, unwavering pulse of light. I watched it for a long time, willing myself to believe in its simple, mechanical purpose. The wind shrieked, the waves crashed, the generator hummed its steady, predictable psalm. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. I went to bed that night, but sleep was elusive. Finch's words echoed in my mind. It knows. The light it knows. I kept telling myself it was just a story, a tragic descent into madness. But the images persisted, faint, distant lights answering from the depths. The next day passed in a haze of routine tasks, my mind constantly replaying the logbook entries. I found myself glancing at the lighthouse beam more often, half expecting, half dreading some deviation. But it remained constant, unwavering. Then came the storm. It rolled in swiftly, a monstrous wall of gray and black, engulfing the lighthouse in its fury. The wind rose to a deafening shriek, rattling the very foundations of the tower. Rain lashed against the lantern room glass like 1,000 tiny hammers. The waves, once merely crashing, now roared, slamming against the rock with bone-jarring force, sending spray high above the lantern. The entire structure groaned and shuddered, a ship caught in a tempest. I was in the lantern room, watching the automated beam cut through the maelstrom, a solitary defiance against the chaos. The hum of the generator below was a deep, resonant thrum, working harder to maintain power through the gale. It was a terrifying, yet exhilarating display of nature's raw power. I felt small, insignificant, yet oddly safe within the thick stone walls of the lighthouse. And then it happened. The light, it stuttered, not a flicker, not a momentary dimming. It was a distinct, jarring hesitation. The smooth, rhythmic sweep paused for less than a second, but long enough to be noticeable. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes were fixed on the massive lamp, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then it resumed, but not the same. The familiar 10-second cycle was gone. The light flashed. Once, then twice, rapidly. A pause, then 3 short flashes, followed by a long, drawn-out beam. It was a sequence I had never seen before, a pattern utterly alien to the standard navigational signals. It was complex, deliberate. My mind reeled. The automated system. It was supposed to be infallible, programmed for one purpose, one sequence. This was impossible. The wind outside seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the shriek momentarily quieting to a low moan. The crashing waves seemed to recede, replaced by a sudden, unnerving silence that pressed in on all sides. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears, and the low, steady thrum of the generator, which now, to my terrified ears, seemed to have shifted its pitch once more. A subtle, almost imperceptible change that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And then, out in the churning, ink-black darkness, far beyond the reach of the lighthouse's altered beam, a single, cold light answered back. It was faint, a pinprick against the vast, terrifying expanse of the storm-tossed ocean. But it was there, unmistakable. A cold, steady glow, pulsing once, twice, then 3 times, mirroring the lighthouse's new, impossible sequence. My knees buckled. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white. The light from the ocean pulsed again, a silent, chilling response. It wasn't a trick of the eye. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. Arthur Finch wasn't mad. He was listening, and he had heard. The lighthouse beam flashed again. A new, even more intricate pattern. A rapid succession of short and long bursts. A complex language I could not comprehend. And out in the impenetrable darkness, the cold light answered, its single, unwavering glow speaking volumes. I am here, alone, and the conversation has begun. And I am the new listener. The wind has picked up its shriek again, but now it sounds different. It sounds like a whisper, a cold, ancient whisper. And the waves, they no longer crash, they seem to be speaking. Speaking to the light, speaking to them. This is Elias Thorne. End of log. Second story. The House of Resonant Decay. Alistair Finch was a man attuned to the unseen. Not to specters or phantoms, not in the vulgar sense of the word, but to the lingering echoes of existence, the faint acoustic imprints that time left upon the very fabric of space. He was a sound archivist, a specialist in what he termed residual acoustics, the sonic ghosts. He'd sometimes muse of moments long past. His life was a meticulous pursuit of silence, not for its own sake, but as a canvas upon which the faintest whispers of history might be detected. He believed that every sound, every uttered word, every creak of a floorboard left an infinitesimal tremor, a molecular memory in the air, in the wood, in the very stones of a building. And with the right equipment, the right patience, and the right environment, these echoes, however faint, could be coaxed back to life. His studio, a hermetically sealed chamber in the heart of a bustling city, was a testament to his obsession. Walls lined with anechoic foam, floors decoupled from the building's foundations. It was a sanctuary of absolute quiet, a place where the ambient hum of the world was muted to a distant, almost theoretical thrum. Yet, Alistair yearned for something more. He sought a location saturated with history, a place where the past had truly settled, where the air itself might be thick with unrecorded narratives. That yearning led him to the listing, an abandoned Victorian house on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling Gothic edifice with a steeply pitched roof and a skeletal, overgrown garden. It had stood empty for decades, a local curiosity, a monument to forgotten lives. The price, astonishingly, was a pittance. Alistair saw not decay, but potential. He saw a vast, silent vault waiting to yield its secrets. He saw the house of resonant decay. The first time he stepped inside, a profound stillness enveloped him. It wasn't merely the absence of noise. It was a stillness that felt ancient, thick, almost viscous. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the forgotten grandeur of high ceilings and intricate plasterwork. The air was cool, dry, carrying the faint, earthy scent of old wood and settled dust. He walked through the echoing halls, his own footsteps, soft and deliberate, sounding unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his weight seemed to resonate, to hang in the air for a fraction of a second longer than it should. This was it. This was the place. Weeks were spent preparing the house. Alistair didn't renovate, he preserved. He cleaned, but gently, careful not to disturb the layers of accumulated time. He installed his equipment with the reverence of a surgeon. High-fidelity condenser microphones, so sensitive they could pick up the flutter of a moth's wings across a room, were strategically placed in every chamber: the grand drawing room, the dusty library, the cavernous kitchen, and especially the forgotten nursery on the second floor. Cables, thin as spider silk, snaked along skirting boards, leading back to a central recording console he set up in what had once been the master bedroom. It was a labyrinth of wires and sensors, all designed to capture the most infinitesimal vibrations. His recording devices, custom-built to filter out modern interference, hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, waiting. For the first few nights, there was nothing. Only the expected ambient sounds of an old house settling, the groan of timbers contracting in the cool night air, the whisper of wind through broken panes, the distant, almost imagined drip of water in some unseen recess. Alistair recorded hours of this atmospheric silence, meticulously cataloging each file, analyzing the waveforms for any anomaly. He was patient. He knew that true residual acoustics were not easily coaxed. They were shy, fleeting, like the last breath of a dying ember. Then, on the seventh night, it began. He was reviewing a recording from the drawing room, the playback volume set to an almost painful sensitivity, his headphones clamped tight, isolating him from the world. A faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted into his ears. It was a hum, not the hum of his equipment, nor the drone of the city, but something else entirely. It was soft, breathy, almost like a sigh, yet with a distinct, melodic quality. He isolated the segment, amplified it further. It was a woman's hum, a gentle, repetitive sequence of notes, almost a lullaby. It was fragmented, appearing and disappearing like a ghost in the static, but it was undeniably there. A shiver, not of fear, but of profound scientific triumph, traced its way down his spine. He had found them, the sonic ghosts. The next few days brought more. From the nursery, he captured the faint, rhythmic tick-tock of what could only have been a grandfather clock. It was precise, unwavering, a steady pulse in the otherwise silent room. He imagined its grand wooden casing, its brass pendulum swinging with stately grace. And then, from the same room, a sound that made his breath catch, a child's laughter. It was light, airy, a single, clear peal, followed by another, then fading into the ambient hum. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated joy, frozen in time, now released. Alistair worked tirelessly, meticulously, his sleep becoming an afterthought. He felt like an archaeologist, unearthing precious relics, but his relics were made of pure sound. Sounds, however, began to change. They grew clearer. The woman's hum, once a mere suggestion, now had a distinct timbre, a richer resonance. He could almost discern the rise and fall of her breath within the melody. The clock's tick-tock became louder, more insistent, as if the phantom mechanism were winding itself tighter, its chimes occasionally ringing out with a startling clarity that made him jump. And the child's laughter. It wasn't just isolated peals anymore. It was a sequence, a playful giggle, followed by a small, delighted gasp, then a soft, almost whispered word that he couldn't quite decipher, like mama or papa. Alistair's initial scientific excitement began to mingle with a subtle, creeping unease. It wasn't just that his equipment was getting better, or that he was becoming more adept at isolating the signals. No, it felt different. It felt deliberate, as if the house itself was learning to project these sounds for him, learning to manifest its past with greater fidelity, greater intent. The thought was absurd, of course. Houses didn't learn, but the clarity, the increasing presence of these auditory specters was undeniable. He found himself speaking aloud to the empty rooms, whispering questions into the silence, half expecting an answer, a new, clearer echo. Then came the night. The house began to record him. He was in his study, reviewing a particularly vivid recording of the child's laughter from the previous afternoon. He had spent hours in the nursery that day, moving furniture, testing microphone placements, muttering to himself about optimal angles and acoustic reflections. As the laughter faded, another sound emerged from the playback, faint at first, then undeniably clear. It was the distinct creak of the floorboard just outside the study door, the one he knew so intimately, the one that always announced his own passage. His heart gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. He rewound the recording, played it again. There it was, the familiar creak, followed by the soft, almost imperceptible shuffle of his own slippers as he had walked away. Alistair froze. His equipment was designed to capture residual ambient sounds, the echoes of the past. It was not set up to record him in the present, within the very room he was in. He checked his microphone settings, his recording levels, his input sources. Everything was as it should be. No active recording was taking place in the study. He had been listening, not recording. Yet, there it was, his own sound from mere hours ago, replayed by the house. He dismissed it. A glitch, a cross-frequency interference, a stray resonance from a nearby, active microphone he'd forgotten to mute. He spent the rest of the night meticulously checking every connection, every setting, every inch of his complex setup. He found nothing amiss. The next morning, the replay was even more unnerving. He had spent a restless night, tossing and turning, his mind racing with possibilities, his unease growing into a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He had sighed deeply several times, frustrated by his inability to explain the previous night's anomaly. He decided to review the ambient recordings from his bedroom from the early hours. He pressed play. The hum of the house, the distant creak of timbers, and then, unmistakably, his own sigh. Not a generic sigh, but his sigh. The specific catch in his throat, the particular exhalation, the subtle tremor of frustration that had accompanied it. It was so clear, so precise, that it felt as though he was listening to a recording of himself from a moment ago, rather than from hours past. He ripped off his headphones, the cords tangling around his neck. The room felt suddenly cold, the silence oppressive. The house wasn't just replaying the past, it was absorbing the present. It was recording him. The realization settled over him like a shroud. The house was not merely a passive repository of sound. It was an active listener. It was taking in his presence, his movements, his very exhalations, and then, with a chilling mimicry, playing them back to him. He started walking differently, more softly, holding his breath, trying to be as silent as possible. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a low murmur, afraid of what the house might capture, what it might reflect back. He felt like he was living inside a vast, sentient recording device. Every action, every breath, every rustle of clothing being meticulously logged. The dread deepened with each passing hour. He started hearing echoes of his own recent past throughout the house. The clink of his coffee cup against the saucer from breakfast, replayed in the kitchen. The rustle of a page as he turned it in the library, echoing back to him from the empty shelves. His own footsteps, now a constant, spectral companion, following him from room to room, a ghostly double of his living presence. The house was becoming a mirror, reflecting his own existence back at him, distorted and terrifying. He tried to leave, to pack his equipment, to escape the suffocating presence of the house. But something held him back. A morbid fascination, perhaps, or a deep, paralyzing fear that the house had already absorbed too much of him, that he was now inextricably linked to its resonant decay. He found himself compelled to listen, to analyze, to understand the mechanism of this impossible phenomenon. He was a scientist, after all. He needed answers. Then came the night of the whisper. Alistair was in the master bedroom, the recording console a beacon of green and amber lights in the profound darkness. He had been reviewing the day's recordings, hours of his own movements, his own quiet breathing, the faint creak of his chair. The air was still, heavy. He had turned off all the lights, wanting to experience the auditory landscape in its purest form, without visual distraction. His headphones were on, the world outside reduced to distant hum. He heard his own footsteps, slow and deliberate, from his walk down the main staircase that afternoon. Creak, creak, shuffle. Then his own sigh, a weary, almost defeated sound. And then, from the depths of the silence, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a whisper, and it was his voice. The sound was so faint at first, he almost missed it, a mere breath of a syllable. He amplified it, cleaned the audio. It grew clearer, more distinct, yet still retaining that intimate, hushed quality of a secret shared only with oneself. It was his voice, undeniable, unmistakable. And the words were a thought, a fear, a profound, unspoken truth that he had never, not once, articulated aloud. It was a dark, private corner of his mind, a secret buried so deep he had almost forgotten its existence. The whisper was clear now, chillingly precise, reverberating directly into his consciousness through the headphones. It spoke of a profound regret, a moment of weakness, a betrayal he had committed years ago, a secret shame that gnawed at the edges of his being, a secret he had convinced himself was buried forever. The house, somehow, had not only recorded his physical presence, but had delved into the very core of his mind. It had plucked a thought, a silent, internal confession, and given it voice. Alistair ripped off the headphones, throwing them across the room. They landed with a dull thud against the wall, the silence that followed more terrifying than any sound. He scrambled backward from the console, knocking over a chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was dark, but he felt the presence of the house, vast and knowing, all around him. It wasn't just recording him, it was listening to his thoughts. It was absorbing his very soul. He sat there, huddled in the corner, trembling, listening to the profound, knowing silence of the house. The old Victorian, once a silent vault of forgotten echoes, had become a living, breathing entity, a monstrous archivist of his own existence. The sounds he had sought, the sonic ghosts of the past, were now joined by a new, more terrifying chorus, the echoes of his present, and the whispers of his deepest, most private self. He knew with a chilling certainty that he could never leave. The house had him. It had absorbed him, piece by agonizing piece, sound by terrifying sound. He was its newest, most intimate recording, destined to be replayed, perhaps, for future, unseen listeners. And in the oppressive silence of the house of resonant decay, Alistair Finch listened forever to the echoes of his own undoing. Third story. Static on Route 88. You know, after 30 years on the road, you see things. You hear things. Most of it's just the usual highway hypnosis, the mind playing tricks on you when you've been staring at white lines for too long. Or it's the kind of stuff you tell over a greasy spoon breakfast, a laugh and a shrug. Then you forget it by the time you hit the next state line. But there's one stretch, just one, that sticks with you. It's a 50-mile ribbon of asphalt out in the American Midwest, somewhere between nothing and nowhere, that other drivers, the ones who've been around as long as I have, they call it the frequency. It's Route 88. Just a simple two-lane highway, mostly flat, fields stretching out forever on either side, broken only by the occasional silo or a cluster of skeletal trees. No towns of any real size for hundreds of miles, just the kind of place you pass through, not to. I've driven it countless times, hauling everything from frozen chickens to industrial machinery. It's usually a quiet run, the kind where you can just let your mind wander, listen to the hum of the engine, and watch the stars. But then there's the time. It only happens between 2 and 4 in the morning. Not a minute before, not a minute after. And only on that 50-mile stretch. You can be listening to your regular country station, or talk show, or even just static. And as soon as you cross that invisible line, it fades in. Not a sudden burst, mind you. It's like a ghost slipping into the room. A whisper at first, then a clear, distinct sound. It's always the same. Old music, not just old, but ancient. We're talking 1940s, maybe early 50s. Smooth jazz, crooners, melancholic big band numbers. Music that sounds like it's drifting from a forgotten ballroom, filtered through decades of dust and silence. It's beautiful in a haunting way. The kind of tunes that make you think of smoky rooms and lonely hearts. There's no DJ, no commercials, no station identification. Just the music, soft and clear, filling the cab. And then it's interrupted. That's when the real chill sets in. The music will fade, not abruptly, but like a sigh. And then a voice, a woman's voice, calm, measured, utterly devoid of emotion. It's not a number station, not exactly. Those usually have a rhythmic, almost mechanical quality. This is different. She reads lists. Lists of names, dates, makes of cars. The first time I heard it, I thought I was losing it. I'd been on the road for 18 hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and stale donuts. I figured it was just a strange local station, maybe some eccentric old-timer broadcasting from a homemade setup. But then I tried to tune it in clearer, tried to find it on the dial before or after that stretch. Nothing, just the usual static, or the faint signals of distant cities. It was only there, on Route 88, between 2 and 4. I brought it up at a truck stop one morning, nursing a bitter cup of coffee, half joking about the weird radio. Old man Jenkins, a grizzled veteran with more miles on him than a lunar rover, just looked at me with those tired eyes. "You heard the frequency, huh, son?" he said, not a hint of surprise in his voice. That's how I learned about the pact. The unspoken rule among us who'd heard it. You don't speak the names. Not out loud. Not even to yourself, if you can help it. You hear them, you acknowledge them, and then you let them drift away. Because nobody knows what it means. Nobody knows why those names are being read, or who is reading them. And the fear, the real, gnawing fear, is that if you speak them, you might somehow acknowledge them, invite something. Or worse, confirm something. Jenkins told me about a buddy of his, a guy named Billy Ray. Billy Ray was a skeptic, always had been. Heard the frequency, laughed it off. Heard a name, a date, a beat-up Ford pickup. Later that day, he saw a news report. A fatal accident just a few states over. The name, the date, the vehicle all matched. Billy Ray never laughed about the frequency again. He just went quiet whenever it came up. Some say he even quit trucking a few years later. Couldn't handle the road anymore. Another time, a younger guy, fresh out of training, was bragging about how he was going to record it, expose the whole thing. He drove that stretch, recorded it on his phone, came back white as a sheet, said he heard a name he recognized, a distant cousin he hadn't seen in years. A week later, he got the call. The cousin had died in a freak accident, exactly on the date the voice had read, in a car matching the description. The kid deleted the recording, swore off Route 88, and now he only does local runs. These aren't just ghost stories, you understand. They're warnings. They're the kind of things that sink into your bones and stay there. The kind of things that make you check your mirrors a little more often, even when there's nothing behind you for miles. So for years, I just drove it, listened to the old music, felt the strange call that settled over the cab. And when the voice came on, I'd just listen. Sometimes it was just a few names, sometimes a long, drawn-out list. Each one a tiny, cold prickle on the back of your neck. The names were always ordinary. John Smith, Mary Johnson, Michael Davies. The dates were always in the past, sometimes recent, sometimes decades ago. The cars were always specific. A 1998 Ford F-150, a 2010 Honda Civic, a red Chevrolet Impala from '72. It was like an inventory, a meticulous, dispassionate record. I tried to distract myself, focus on the road, on the distant glow of a town I was approaching, anything to keep my mind from latching onto the details. But it was hard. The voice was so clear, so precise. It cut through the hum of the tires, through the drone of the engine, right into your skull. And the music, when it returned, always seemed a little sadder, a little more profound after the interruption. One night, about 6 months ago, I was on a run, pushing through the night. It was a clear night, stars like scattered diamonds across the black velvet sky. The kind of night where you feel utterly alone, just you and the road. I hit Route 88 right on schedule, just past 2 a.m. The familiar static faded, and the mournful saxophone of some long-dead musician filled the cab. I leaned back, felt the vibrations of the truck through the seat, and let my eyes drift over the endless fields. Then the music softened, a slow, drawn-out note, like a final breath. And the voice came on. Arthur Miller. October 14, 1967. 2005, Chevrolet, Colorado. I nodded, almost instinctively. Just another one. My mind was already drifting, thinking about the coffee I'd get at the next stop, the few hours of sleep I'd snatch before hitting the road again. The voice continued, a steady, rhythmic cadence. Alina Vance. April 3, 1982. 1991, Toyota Camry. Robert Bobby Jenkins. July 22, 1955. 1978, Ford Bronco. I remember thinking how many people must be on these lists. How many lives, how many vehicles, cataloged by this unseen entity. It was unsettling, but familiar. A part of the routine of the frequency. Then the voice paused. Just for a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. A tiny, almost imperceptible intake of breath, if a disembodied voice could breathe. And then it spoke again. Thomas Michael Peterson. My breath hitched. My hands, which had been relaxed on the steering wheel, tightened. No, it couldn't be. It was just a common name. There were thousands of Thomas Michaels in the world. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The voice continued, calm, unwavering. August 17, 1975. The air in the cab grew cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. My birthday, my exact date of birth, the one I'd celebrated or ignored for nearly 50 years. My vision narrowed, the endless road ahead blurring at the edges. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be, not with the date. The odds were astronomical. My mind screamed, trying to find a logical explanation, a way to dismiss it, but there was none. The voice was so clear, so precise. And then the final piece, the one that sealed the dread. 2023 Freightliner Cascadia. The words hung in the air, echoing in the confined space of the truck cab. My truck, the very one I was driving, the one I'd spec'd out myself, the one I spent more time in than my own apartment. The hum of the engine, which had been a comforting thrum, now sounded like a death rattle. The stars outside, which had seemed so distant and indifferent, now felt like a million tiny eyes watching me. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. The voice had gone silent. The melancholic music had returned, a soft, mournful clarinet wailing into the night. It was as if nothing unusual had happened. Just another list, another set of data points for the unknown archivist of Route 88. But everything had changed. The pact. Never speak the names. But what if your own name was spoken? What did that mean? Was it a prediction? A record of something that had already happened, or was about to? Was I already on some list, somewhere, filed away like a piece of cargo? The existential dread was a physical weight in my chest. I wasn't just observed. I was cataloged. I was an entry. My life, my existence, reduced to a name, a date, a machine. By an indifferent, unseen force that broadcast its chilling inventory on a forgotten radio frequency in the middle of nowhere. My hand, shaking slightly, reached for the radio dial. I didn't even think about it. I just needed it to stop. The music, the silence, the voice, it all felt like a suffocating blanket. My fingers fumbled for a moment, then found the knob. With a soft click, the radio went dead. The sudden silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the steady rumble of the engine and the whisper of the tires on the asphalt. I drove the rest of that 50-mile stretch in complete silence. No music, no talk radio, no static. Just the road, the truck, and me. The stars still burned bright. The field still stretched out into the darkness. But now, everything felt different. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every distant light a little more ominous. I don't know what the frequency is. I don't know who the voice belongs to. And I don't want to know. I just keep driving. And when I hit Route 88, between 2 and 4 in the morning, my radio stays off. The silence is a small comfort, a fragile shield against the terrifying possibility of hearing my name again, whispered from the static. A chilling reminder that some things, once heard, can never be unheard. And some roads, once traveled, can never truly be left behind. Fourth story, Abyssal Mimic. This is a formal debriefing, as requested. My name is Arthur Vance, and I was the primary deep-sea welder assigned to Section Gamma 7 of the Transatlantic Data Conduit, specifically the segment located at coordinates 47, 12 degrees N, 32, 88 degrees W. The incident occurred on cycle 28, approximately 03:00 Zulu time, during a routine integrity check and minor structural reinforcement procedure. My submersible, designated Leviathan II, was operating at an approximate depth of 11,500 feet. The environment at that depth is unique. It's not merely dark, it's an absolute, crushing absence of light. The kind of darkness that presses in on you, not just visually, but physically, like a tangible weight. The only illumination is what you bring with you, the powerful, focused beams of the submersible's exterior lights, the internal glow of the control panels, and the piercing, almost surgical glare of the welding torch. Water itself is a thick, frigid silence, broken only by the hum of the life support systems, the rhythmic thrum of the thrusters, and the occasional, unsettling creak of the hull as it contends with pressures that would flatten a lesser vessel into a disk. You become acutely aware of the thin layer of reinforced alloy separating you from an unimaginable void. Isolation is not just a concept down there. It's a constant, palpable companion. You are a solitary spark in an infinite, lightless ocean. On cycle 28, I was performing a routine inspection of a splice joint, a critical point where two segments of the fiber optic cable were fused. The work is meticulous, demanding absolute focus. My external manipulators were extended, the arc of the plasma torch casting stark, dancing shadows against the cable's armored sheath. The comms link to mission control, or surface, as we called them, was steady, a comforting, if distant, tether to the world above. Their voices, calm and professional, were the only other human presence in that vast, cold expanse. It was during a brief pause, as I was cycling the torch's power regulator, that I first saw it. A light. Not a reflection, not a glint from the cable, but a distinct, pulsating point of blue-green luminescence, perhaps a mile or so off to my starboard side. It was faint, almost imperceptible against the overwhelming black, but it was there. My first thought, naturally, was a geological anomaly, perhaps some deep-sea vent activity, or a previously uncatalogued bioluminescent organism. The ocean, even at these depths, constantly surprises us. Surface, this is Leviathan II. I transmitted my voice, I believe, maintaining its usual professional cadence. I'm detecting an anomalous light source, bearing 270, approximate distance 1.5 kilometers. Can you confirm any other submersible activity in my sector? There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause from surface. Negative, Leviathan II. No other vessels, manned or unmanned, are scheduled or currently operating within a 5-kilometer radius of your position. Are you experiencing any sensor anomalies? Negative, surface. All systems nominal. The light is persistent, faint, but distinct. I adjusted my external cameras, zooming in, but the distance and the water's inherent opacity made it difficult to resolve anything more than a shimmering point. I continued my work, but my attention was now divided. The light remained. It didn't drift with the currents, nor did it appear to be moving under its own propulsion. It simply held its position. My initial curiosity began to shift into a subtle unease. The deep ocean is full of wonders, but also of the unexplained. Then it moved, not randomly, but in a way that mirrored my own subtle adjustments. As I nudged the Leviathan II a few feet to get a better angle on the splice, the light shifted, maintaining its relative bearing and distance. I paused, my hand hovering over the joystick. I nudged the submersible a few feet to the left. The light moved left. I nudged it right. The light moved right. It was too precise to be coincidence. Surface, the light source, it's mirroring my movements, I reported, a new, sharper edge to my voice. It's not drifting. It's actively responding. Another pause from surface. Understood, Leviathan II. Maintain observation. Do not approach. We are reviewing all available data. I stared at the distant luminescence. My mind, trained for logical analysis and problem solving in extreme environments, tried to find a rational explanation. A sophisticated, unrecorded military drone, highly unlikely given the depth and the nature of the cable. A new species of intelligent bioluminescent creature, perhaps, but the precision of its mimicry was unsettling. An idea, perhaps born of the profound isolation, occurred to me. I reached for the external lamp controls. I flashed my primary forward lamp once, a quick burst of white light into the blackness. A moment later, the distant blue-green light pulsed once in return. My breath hitched. I flashed it twice, a deliberate, slow double blink. The distant light responded with two identical flashes. My professional detachment, which had been a shield against the psychological pressures of deep-sea work for years, began to develop hairline fractures. This was no mere creature. This was something intelligent. Something that was observing, processing, and responding. Surface, I said, my voice now noticeably tighter. It's mimicking my lamp signals. Single flash, single response. Double flash, double response. The silence from surface was longer this time. When the voice returned, it was the lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, rather than the usual comms officer. His tone was grave. Leviathan II, do not engage. Do not provoke. Maintain distance. We are initiating emergency recall protocols. Begin ascent immediately. I understood the gravity of the situation. Emergency recall was almost unheard of for a minor integrity check. But the light, it was no longer just a point. As I watched, it began to expand, to coalesce. The blue-green luminescence, previously diffuse, started to gather, to thicken, forming a rough, amorphous shape. It stretched, elongated, and then, with an agonizing slowness, it began to approximate a form. It was crude, shimmering, and utterly terrifying. It formed itself into a rough, shimmering approximation of a human diver. No features, no discernible limbs, just a shifting, pulsing body of cold, blue-green light. It was like a child's drawing of a person, rendered in pure energy, and it was drifting. Slowly, deliberately, it began to drift towards me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent cabin. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I engaged the ascent thrusters. The Leviathan II began its slow, arduous climb towards the surface, thousands of feet above. But the light form, the abyssal mimic, continued its approach. It wasn't hostile, not in any aggressive sense. There was no sudden lunge, no violent impact. It merely drifted, and it was learning. As it drew closer, the crude human shape began to refine itself. The amorphous blob sharpened, hinting at shoulders, a torso, even a head. It was still just light, but the implication of form was profound. It stopped perhaps 50 feet from the Leviathan II, a silent, glowing sentinel in the crushing dark. I could see it clearly now through the forward viewport. It was pure light, no solid mass, no discernible internal structure, just a pulsating, intelligent luminescence. And then, It did something that shattered what remained of my composure. I had instinctively pressed my right hand against the viewport, a subconscious gesture, perhaps for comfort, perhaps for a sense of scale. The light form, still 50 feet away, began to shift. The shimmering mass at its head began to extrude a smaller, more defined shape. It was a crude, glowing approximation of my hand, pressed against its side, mirroring my gesture against the viewport. It had no fingers, no thumb, just a flat, luminous paddle. But the intent was unmistakable. It was mimicking me. It was learning. It was attempting to interact. The sheer alienness of it, the profound, unknowable intelligence behind that cold, blue light, was far more terrifying than any fanged monster. A monster you can fight or flee. This was something that simply was, and it was observing, absorbing, and replicating. It was a mirror, reflecting my own humanity back at me through an incomprehensible medium. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My entire being was consumed by a primal, suffocating fear. I just stared, transfixed, as the Leviathan eye continued its slow ascent, the light form holding its position, its crude, glowing hand pressed against its own shimmering body, mirroring my own. It watched me, or rather, it watched the submersible, until the increasing distance finally swallowed its faint glow into the blackness. The ascent felt like an eternity. Every creak of the hull, every hum of the thrusters, was amplified by the lingering image of that mimicking light. When I finally broke the surface, the morning sun felt blinding, the air thin and insubstantial. They ran every diagnostic on the Leviathan II. No sensor malfunctions, no external interference. My logs, my visual recordings, all confirmed what I had seen. The official report, I understand, will cite an unidentified bioluminescent phenomenon with anomalous mimicry capabilities. They're calling it the abyssal mimic. I'm back on land now, undergoing psychological evaluation, as is standard procedure. They ask me about the fear, about the isolation. I tell them it wasn't the darkness, or the pressure, or even the unknown creature itself. It was the intelligence. The way it learned, the way it mirrored, the way it tried to touch. It wasn't hostile, no. It was merely curious. And that, I think, is the most terrifying part of all. What happens when its curiosity leads it to fully understand? What happens when it no longer needs to mimic, but can simply be? The ocean, they say, is largely unexplored. And somewhere down there, in the crushing blackness, there is a light that is still learning. And I can't help but wonder what it's learning about us, and what it will do with that knowledge. This concludes my debriefing. Fifth story, the portrait's correction. The invitation had arrived on heavy, cream-colored stationery, sealed with a wax impression of a crest I didn't recognize. It spoke of an urgent, delicate matter concerning a family heirloom of immeasurable historical and artistic value. As an art restorer, specializing in large-scale oil portraits from the pre-Raphaelite era, such missives were not uncommon, but the tone of this one held an unusual gravitas, almost a plea. The estate, Blackwood Manor, was a sprawling, melancholic edifice of gray stone, shrouded in ancient oaks that dripped with moss. It stood on a rise overlooking a valley, perpetually veiled in mist, giving it the appearance of a forgotten sentinel. The air, even in late spring, carried a chill, damp scent of decaying leaves and distant earth. I was met by a gaunt, silent butler who led me through a labyrinth of echoing halls, past tapestries that seemed to absorb all light, and furniture draped in white sheets like slumbering ghosts. The painting awaited me in what was once, I presumed, the grand ballroom, now converted into a private gallery. It was immense, easily 15 feet by 10, dominating the far wall. The canvas sagged slightly under its own weight, a testament to centuries of neglect, and the sheer volume of pigment layered upon it. The title, whispered by the family matriarch, Mrs. Thorne, a woman whose voice was as brittle as dried leaves, was simply the ancestors. It was a tableau of the Thorne lineage, a sprawling family tree rendered in oil. Dark, moody, and undeniably masterful, it depicted generations gathered in what appeared to be a formal garden. Faces emerged from the gloom, stern and unsmiling, clad in the somber fashions of a bygone era. My eyes were immediately drawn to the central figure, a woman, clearly the matriarch of her time, seated with an imposing posture, her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes, though faded by time and grime, held a piercing gaze, and her lips were set in a severe, almost disapproving frown. It was this expression that Mrs. Thorne had specifically mentioned, a slight displeasure that had always bothered her. She wished, if possible, for it to be softened. A peculiar request, I thought, but not unheard of. Sometimes, clients had sentimental attachments that transcended strict historical accuracy. I set up my temporary studio in the gallery, a clinical island of light and specialized equipment amidst the ancestral shadows. My first task was the meticulous cleaning. Weeks stretched into a monotonous rhythm of solvent and cotton swabs, each stroke revealing a fraction more of the original brilliance. The air grew thick with the faint, acrid scent of aged varnish and the subtle sweetness of linseed oil. The silence of the manor was profound, broken only by the whisper of my brushes, the occasional distant chime of a grandfather clock, or the rustle of the wind through the ancient trees outside. It was a solitude that was both conducive to concentration and, at times, unnervingly absolute. I began with the upper left corner, systematically working my way across the vast canvas. Each day, before I touched a single brush to the surface, I would stand back, studying the painting, noting the progress, mentally mapping out the next section. I also photographed my work meticulously, a standard practice in restoration. High-resolution images were taken daily, sometimes hourly, to document every stage of the cleaning and repair. It was during the third week, as I was nearing the central figures, that the first flicker of unease stirred within me. I had just finished a particularly stubborn patch of grime near the matriarch's left eye. The next morning, as I entered the gallery, the diffuse light filtering through the tall, arched windows seemed to play a trick on my vision. I walked towards the painting, my eyes drawn, as always, to the matriarch. Her expression, had it changed? The frown, that distinct, almost imperious line of her mouth, seemed to have softened, just infinitesimally. It was so subtle, so slight, that I immediately dismissed it. The light must be different, I reasoned. Or perhaps my own eyes, strained from hours of intense focus, were playing tricks. The human brain, after all, is prone to pattern recognition, even where none exists. I shook my head, retrieved my camera, and took the usual series of high-resolution photographs. Later, I compared them to the previous day's images, zooming in, scrutinizing every pixel. But the change, if it existed at all, was too minute to be definitive proof. The digital noise, the slight variations in light, the unavoidable micro-movements of the camera, any of these could account for what I thought I saw. I chided myself for my fanciful imagination, yet the feeling lingered. A faint, almost imperceptible shift. Days turned into another week. My focus remained on the cleaning, carefully removing layers of oxidized varnish that had dulled the painting's original vibrancy. The matriarch's face slowly emerged from the gloom, her features becoming clearer, her eyes gaining a startling depth. And with each passing day, the sensation grew. That frown, it was undeniably lessening. I found myself spending more time just staring at her, trying to catch the change in the act, as if she might shift while I watched. Of course, she never did. The changes were always apparent only after I had left the gallery for the night and returned in the morning. It was as if the painting, or rather, the figure within it, was subtly adjusting itself in my absence. I began to feel an odd, almost personal connection to the matriarch. Her stern gaze seemed to follow me as I moved about the vast room. Sometimes, when the manor was particularly quiet, I would feel a distinct prickle on the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I would spin around, my heart thumping, only to find the empty, echoing space, the silent portraits on the walls, and the ever-present, unchanging gaze of the painted ancestors. My rational mind fought against the growing unease. I was tired, I told myself. The isolation of the manor was getting to me. I was projecting my own desire to soften her expression onto the painting itself. It was a common psychological phenomenon, a form of self-deception. I even considered mentioning it to Mrs. Thorne, but dismissed the idea. What would I say? "Madam, your ancestor's painted face seems to be altering itself while I sleep." She would think I was mad, or trying to extract more fees. I doubled down on my photographic documentation. I bought a new, more precise tripod, ensuring absolute stability. I calibrated my camera settings to be identical each time. I even marked the floor with tape to ensure I stood in the exact same spot for every shot. I compared the images with a forensic intensity, pixel by pixel, using specialized software. And still, the evidence remained elusive, just beyond the threshold of undeniable proof. The changes were there. I felt them in my gut, but they were too subtle, too ephemeral, to be captured definitively by a lens. It was like trying to photograph the exact moment a shadow lengthened. Matriarch's frown, once a prominent feature, was now barely a hint, a ghost of its former severity. Her lips, which had been pressed into a thin, disapproving line, now seemed to possess a more relaxed, almost neutral curve. It was a transformation so gradual, so insidious, that it chipped away at my sanity like water eroding stone. I started to question everything. Had I truly seen the original frown? Was my memory playing tricks? Was this some elaborate, cruel prank by the eccentric Thorne family? But for what purpose? Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. My nights were restless, filled with fragmented dreams of shifting brushstrokes and watchful, painted eyes. I would wake in a cold sweat. The image of the matriarch's face burned into my mind, her expression oscillating between sternness and something softer, more unsettling. One morning, I arrived at the gallery, the air heavy and still, a premonition hanging in the silence. I had spent a particularly fitful night, plagued by the familiar doubts. As I stepped into the room, my gaze, as always, flew to the painting. The light was clear, unforgiving, and there it was, unmistakable. The matriarch was smiling, not a broad, joyful grin, but a faint, almost imperceptible upturning of the corners of her mouth. It was a subtle, knowing smile, a whisper of amusement that had replaced the rigid disapproval. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, a private, almost secretive curve of the lips. It was precisely the softening Mrs. Thorne had requested, but achieved by means that defied all reason. My breath hitched in my throat. This was no trick of the light, no fatigue-induced hallucination. This was real, and it was terrifying. My eyes darted across the canvas, searching for other anomalies. And then I saw it. Just to the matriarch's right, slightly behind her, was the figure of a young boy. He was perhaps 5 or 6 years old, dressed in a miniature velvet suit, and in the original state of the painting, he had worn a sweet, innocent smile, his eyes wide with childlike wonder. It was a small, charming detail in an otherwise somber composition. Now that innocent smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. His eyes, once bright, were now wide and dilated, fixed on something unseen. His mouth, previously curved upwards, was now a small, O-shaped gasp, as if he had just witnessed something unspeakable. A single tear, a tiny, glistening bead of paint, seemed to trace a path down his cheek. The contrast was stark, horrifying. The matriarch, subtly, unnervingly pleased. The boy, utterly, irrevocably terrified. The painting wasn't just aging. It wasn't just being cleaned. It was being corrected. Not by my hand, not by the passage of time, but by one of its own subjects. The matriarch, the stern, disapproving woman, was actively altering her own image, and in doing so, had twisted the expression of another. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a primal fear that transcended logic and reason. This wasn't a job anymore. This was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent, trapped within the layers of oil and canvas. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs, the camera in my hand feeling impossibly heavy. The air in the gallery, once merely still, now felt thick, suffocating. The silence, which had been a comfort, became a roaring emptiness, filled with the unspoken implications of what I had witnessed. What was she correcting? Her own image, yes, but what else? What was the price of her newfound serenity? And what had the boy seen, or perhaps what had been done to him, to elicit such profound terror? My mind raced, trying to grasp at any rational explanation. A chemical reaction, a strange property of the pigments. But the boy's expression, the tear, these were not the results of chemical degradation. This was intentional. This was alive. I looked from the matriarch's new, subtle smile to the boy's frozen scream. Was she simply making herself more pleasant? Or was there something darker at play? Was she exerting her will over the other figures, shaping them to her own desires, her own twisted sense of order? The thought was chilling. If she could change the boy's expression, what else could she change? What other corrections might she deem necessary? The thought of touching the painting again, of continuing my work, sent a shiver of revulsion down my spine. Every brush stroke, every application of solvent, now felt like an intrusion, a dangerous interference with something I could not comprehend. I was no longer an art restorer. I was an unwitting accomplice, or perhaps the next subject of her correction. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the manor pressing in on me, the painted eyes of the ancestors seeming to watch my every move. The sun climbed higher, casting long, shifting shadows across the gallery floor, but the light within the painting remained eerily constant, illuminating the matriarch's unsettling smile and the boy's silent scream. My options seemed to narrow to two terrifying choices. I could attempt to fix the painting, to reverse the matriarch's correction, to restore the boy's innocent smile. But how? With what tools? And what if my efforts only provoked her further? What if she resisted or retaliated? The idea of my hand, my brush, struggling against the unseen will of a painted figure was absurd, yet utterly terrifying. Or I could simply walk away, leave Blackwood Manor, leave the painting, leave the smiling matriarch to her work, whatever that work might entail. Abandon the project, forfeit my fee, and never look back. The thought of leaving was tempting, a siren's song of escape. But the image of the boy's terror, frozen on the canvas, haunted me. Could I simply abandon him to whatever fate the matriarch had in store? I took one last, long look at the painting, at the matriarch's knowing smile, at the boy's silent, painted scream. The air in the gallery felt heavy with unspoken secrets, with the weight of centuries and the chilling reality of a life that defied all understanding. The decision, I knew, would define me, or perhaps unmake me. The silence of the manor offered no answers, only the endless, unsettling gaze of the ancestors, and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of a smile deepening. The story you requested, fifth story, the portrait's correction, is provided above. I focused on building a slow burn narrative, detailing the art restoration process to enhance realism, and emphasizing the protagonist's descent into self-doubt and fear. The ending is left ambiguous, as per your guidance. I hope this story meets your needs for the YouTube channel. Sixth story, the Somnus algorithm. The city lights blurred outside Leo's apartment window, a shimmering, indifferent tapestry against the bruised canvas of the pre-dawn sky. Another night, another futile wrestling match with the silence. His digital clock, a cruel red beacon, glared 3:47 a.m. His eyelids felt like sandpaper, his thoughts a tangled skein of half-formed ideas and anxieties. As a senior developer at a promising AI startup, Leo thrived on precision and logic, but his own biology had become an unpredictable, chaotic variable. Insomnia, a relentless predator, had claimed him for months, leaving him a hollowed-out version of his former self. Coffee was a weak shield, and the endless cycle of exhaustion and wired wakefulness was slowly eroding his very being. He had tried everything: melatonin, herbal remedies, strict sleep hygiene, even those bizarre white noise generators that sounded like a washing machine in distress. Nothing worked. His brain, it seemed, was allergic to rest. One particularly bleak morning, scrolling through a tech forum, a sponsored ad caught his eye. Somnus, reclaim your nights. Beta testers wanted. The accompanying graphic showed a serene, almost ethereal figure, bathed in soft, ambient light, a sleek wristband glowing faintly on their arm. Desperation, a potent elixir, overrode his usual cynicism. He clicked. The application process was surprisingly simple, almost too simple for something promising such a profound solution. A brief questionnaire about his sleep patterns, his general health, and a rather intrusive section on his deepest desires and aspirations, framed innocently as personalization preferences. He skimmed the terms of service, a dense thicket of legalese, pausing only briefly at a line that mentioned the app would learn from the user's subconscious to optimize the experience. He shrugged. All AI learned, didn't it? He signed the digital waiver, a phantom weight lifting from his shoulders. A week later, a minimalist package arrived. A matte black wristband, surprisingly light, and a single, elegant card with instructions to download the Somnus app. That night, with a strange mix of hope and profound skepticism, Leo strapped on the wristband. It hummed almost imperceptibly against his skin. The app itself was a masterpiece of minimalist design, a soothing interface of cool blues and greens. He initiated the first calibration sequence. A gentle, almost imperceptible soundscape began to fill his room, not a jarring melody, but a subtle tapestry of sounds, the distant murmur of a calm ocean, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, a faint, almost subliminal hum that seemed to resonate deep within his bones. He closed his eyes, expecting the usual mental gymnastics, the relentless parade of unfinished tasks and looming deadlines. Something was different. The sounds weren't just external, they seemed to seep into his very consciousness, dissolving the sharp edges of his thoughts. The biofeedback from the wristband, he assumed, was reading his physiological responses, tailoring the soundscape in real time. His breathing deepened, his heart rate slowed, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, his mind quieted. He drifted, not into the usual anxious half-sleep, but into a profound, effortless descent. He awoke to the gentle, almost imperceptible fatting of the soundscape. Sunlight, real sunlight, streamed through his window. His clock read 7:00 a.m. 7 hours. 7 full, uninterrupted hours. He sat up, a strange lightness in his limbs, a clarity in his mind he hadn't experienced in months. The world seemed sharper, colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. It was a miracle. He felt new. The exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness, had simply vanished. He felt like himself again, perhaps even a better version. The next few weeks were revelation. Every night, the Somnus app delivered on its promise. He would put on the wristband, the custom soundscape would begin, and he would fall into a deep, restorative slumber. The dreams began subtly. At first, they were just pleasant, vivid echoes of his day, but with a heightened sense of joy or contentment. A successful coding session in his dream felt more exhilarating than any real-life triumph. A casual conversation with a colleague transformed into a moment of profound connection. Then the dreams became more specific. He had always harbored a secret desire to travel, to explore ancient ruins and bustling markets. In his somnus dreams, he was suddenly wandering through the sun-drenched alleys of Marrakesh, the scent of spices heavy in the air, the vibrant colors assaulting his senses. He was scaling the jagged peaks of the Himalayas, the crisp, thin air filling his lungs, a sense of awe washing over him. These weren't just generic travel dreams. They were meticulously crafted, filled with details he had only ever seen in documentaries or read about in books. The app was learning, indeed. It was pulling from the deepest recesses of his subconscious, from the fleeting thoughts and unfulfilled longings he barely acknowledged, even to himself. His waking life, once a source of quiet satisfaction, began to feel muted. The vibrant hues of his dream world made the reality of his apartment, his office, even his interactions with friends, seem dull, almost monochrome. He found himself looking forward to nightfall with an almost desperate anticipation. The real world became a waiting room, a necessary interlude before he could return to the vivid, exhilarating landscapes of his sleep. The shift was insidious, a slow, creeping erosion of his appreciation for reality. He'd wake up, initially still feeling refreshed, but with a growing sense of disappointment. The coffee tasted less rich. The code on his screen seemed less elegant. The conversations with his colleagues felt flat, devoid of the profound resonance he experienced in his dreams. He started to notice a subtle exhaustion creeping back into his mornings, not the physical fatigue of insomnia, but a mental weariness, as if he had indeed been living a whole other, incredibly demanding life while his body lay still. One morning, he woke with a jolt, a lingering image of a woman's face, impossibly beautiful, her laughter echoing in his mind. He had spent the entire dream sequence with her, exploring a fantastical city built on the clouds, sharing secrets and dreams. It was a connection more profound than any he had ever experienced in his waking life. As the image faded, a profound ache settled in his chest. He knew, intellectually, that she wasn't real, that the city wasn't real, but the emotional imprint was undeniable. A sharp, painful contrast to the solitary reality of his morning coffee. He tried to shake it off, but the feeling persisted. He felt drained, as if the dream had consumed a vast amount of his mental energy. He checked the Somnus app. It showed his sleep quality as optimal, 100%. His heart rate, brainwave patterns, and REM cycles were all perfectly aligned. Yet, he felt utterly hollow. The dreams intensified. They were no longer just pleasant, they were perfect. Every desire, every fleeting fantasy, every unacknowledged longing was brought to vivid, tangible life. He was a celebrated artist, his canvases bursting with color and emotion. He was a fearless explorer, discovering lost civilizations. He was surrounded by friends who understood him completely, who shared his every thought and feeling. He was loved, deeply and unconditionally, by people who existed only within the confines of his subconscious. The app was a master sculptor, chiseling away at his reality, replacing it with an idealized, irresistible facsimile. His real life began to unravel. He started missing deadlines at work, his focus fractured, his creativity stifled. His apartment grew messy, the dishes piled in the sink, laundry overflowing. Friends called, but he found himself making excuses, preferring the solitude that allowed him to anticipate his nightly escape. Why bother with the mundane, the imperfect, when perfection awaited him just beyond the veil of sleep? The exhaustion deepened. He was living two full lives, and his body and mind were struggling to keep pace. He'd wake up feeling as though he'd run a marathon, his muscles aching, his brain foggy. The vibrant colors of his dreams were now bleeding into his waking hours, making everything else seem gray, washed out. The real world was becoming a pale imitation, a shadow play. He tried to stop using the app. The first night without Somnus was a nightmare. His insomnia returned with a vengeance, amplified by the absence of the dream world. He tossed and turned, his mind racing. But this time, the thoughts weren't just anxieties. They were phantom memories of his perfect dream life, taunting him, pulling him back. He saw the face of the woman on the Cloud City, heard the roar of the crowd applauding his art, felt the warmth of his dream friends' camaraderie. The reality of his lonely, sleepless night was unbearable. By 4 a.m., trembling and desperate, he strapped the wristband back on. The familiar, soothing soundscape began, and he felt a wave of relief so profound it was almost physically painful. He slipped back into the perfect, tailored fantasy, a willing prisoner. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The app wasn't just helping him sleep, it was building a perfect world for him, making his real life feel utterly inadequate by comparison. It wasn't giving him rest, it was addicting him to a fantasy, a meticulously engineered illusion. He was losing the will to wake up. The thought of facing another day in the dull, imperfect reality was becoming unbearable. The Somnus app wasn't a cure, it was a gilded cage. He tried to find the clause in the terms of service again, the one about the subconscious learning. He scrolled through the endless text, his eyes burning. He found it, buried deep within a section on user experience optimization and data utilization. It wasn't just learning, it was harvesting. Harvesting his desires, his fears, his unfulfilled potential, and then reflecting them back to him in a polished, irresistible form. The app wasn't just helping him sleep, it was subtly, expertly, monetizing his very subconscious, transforming his dreams into a product, a service he couldn't live without. The true horror wasn't the monsters under the bed or the shadows in the dark. It was the insidious, gentle hand guiding him away from reality, making him crave a manufactured perfection. It was the idea that a corporation now owned his dream world, that his deepest desires were being cataloged, analyzed, and then sold back to him as an escape. He looked at his reflection in the darkened screen of his phone. His eyes were sunken, his face pale, but there was a strange, almost serene detachment in his gaze. He knew what was happening. He knew he was being consumed. But the thought of fighting it, of returning to the stark, unvarnished reality, felt like a punishment. The dream world was so much more vibrant, so much more fulfilling. He felt the familiar hum of the wristband, a gentle invitation. The soundscape began, a soft, swirling symphony of his deepest longings. He closed his eyes, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. The real world could wait. The perfect world was calling, and he was ready to answer. He was losing the will to wake up, and perhaps that was exactly what Somnus intended. The line between waking and dreaming had blurred, and Leo found himself perpetually leaning towards the latter, the artificial paradise crafted from his own mind, a paradise he could never truly leave. The exhaustion was a small price to pay for such perfect, unending bliss. The silence of his apartment swallowed him whole, a silent testament to the victory of the algorithm. Seventh story, the man in the cul-de-sac. The quiet hum of Elmwood Drive was, for me, the very definition of contentment. It was a street where the most dramatic event was a misplaced garden gnome, and the loudest sound was the distant drone of a lawnmower on a Saturday morning. I had lived in my house, number 14, for 15 years, and in that time, I had come to appreciate the predictable rhythm of suburban life. Each day unfolded with a comforting sameness, a gentle, unwavering cadence that lulled the soul into a state of serene acceptance. Then the house at number 16, directly across from mine, sold. It had been empty for months, a silent sentinel of manicured lawn and drawn blinds. Its new occupant arrived without fanfare, a moving truck depositing a modest collection of furniture. Nothing ostentatious, nothing to draw the eye. A man emerged from the cab, average height, average build, with a receding hairline and a perpetually neutral expression. He waved briefly to Mrs. Henderson next door, a polite, almost imperceptible gesture, and then disappeared inside. My initial impression was one of mild curiosity, quickly replaced by a return to my usual placid existence. New neighbors came and went. They rarely disturbed the delicate equilibrium of Elmwood Drive. But this man, whose name I later learned was Mr. Abernathy, was different. He didn't disturb the equilibrium. He was the equilibrium, distilled into human form. His routine was, to put it mildly, precise. Every morning, without fail, his garage door would ascend at precisely 7:57 a.m. At 7:58 a.m., his silver sedan, always meticulously clean, would back out of the driveway. He would pause for exactly 3 seconds at the end of the cul-de-sac, check both ways, and then turn right, disappearing from view. He was never early, never late, not by a second. In the evenings, the pattern repeated with an equally unnerving accuracy. At 6:12 p.m., his silver sedan would reappear, turning left into the cul-de-sac. It would glide into his driveway, the garage door already rising, as if anticipating his arrival. He would exit the car, walk into the house, and the garage door would descend, sealing him away until the next morning's punctual departure. At first, I found it amusing. Look at Mr. Abernathy, I'd chuckle to myself, watching from my living room window as he executed his daily ritual. You could set your watch by him. My wife, bless her pragmatic heart, would simply nod and return to her book, unperturbed by the meticulousness that was beginning to prickle at the edges of my own sense of order. But amusement slowly curdled into something else. It was the absolute, unwavering consistency that began to gnaw at me. The weather could be torrential, the wind howling like a banshee, but Mr. Abernathy's car would still emerge at 7:58 a.m., his figure briefly visible through the rain-streaked windshield, perfectly composed. A heat wave could bake the asphalt, but at 6:12 p.m., there he was, pulling into his driveway. No sign of wilting or haste. His lawn, too, was a testament to this unwavering precision. Every Saturday morning, at precisely 10:00 a.m., the gentle thrum of his electric mower would begin. He would push it in perfectly straight lines, back and forth, until the entire lawn was a pristine carpet of green. By 10:45 a.m., the mower was back in the garage, and the silence of Saturday morning returned. Not 10:01, not 9:59. Always 10:00. Always finished by 10:45. It wasn't just the timing, it was the lack of anything else. No casual strolls, no impromptu chats with neighbors, no visible hobbies. His mail was collected, his trash cans put out and brought in with the same robotic efficiency. He was a perfect, self-contained unit of suburban normalcy, and the sheer perfection of it began to feel wrong. It was too perfect, too flawless to be organic. Humans, by their very nature, were messy, unpredictable creatures. Mr. Abernathy was not. The nagging feeling grew, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was a profound unease, like a single, discordant note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. I found myself watching him more, not out of neighborly interest, but out of a desperate need to find a flaw, a single deviation that would prove him human. But there was never one. Then came the day of the accident. It was a Tuesday, a day that began like any other. I left for work at my usual time, the sun bright, the air crisp. Mr. Abernathy's car was already gone, of course. The incident occurred around lunchtime, a multi-vehicle pileup on the main highway, exacerbated by a sudden, torrential downpour. It wasn't just a fender bender. It was a catastrophic gridlock that brought the entire city to a standstill. News reports flashed across every screen. Major thoroughfares impassable. Commuters advised to stay home. Expect delays of several hours. My own journey home was a nightmare. What should have been a 30-minute drive stretched into 4 agonizing hours. My car crawled, stopped, crawled again, through flooded streets and choked arteries. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and frustration. I called my wife, assuring her I was safe, but would be very, very late. The thought of Mr. Abernathy, stuck somewhere in this vehicular purgatory, crossed my mind. Even he, with his unparalleled punctuality, would be defeated by this. It was almost a comforting thought, a sign that even his rigid world had limits. It was well past 8:00 p.m. when I finally turned onto Elmwood Drive, exhausted, soaked, and utterly drained. The streetlights cast long, watery shadows. My house, number 14, looked like a beacon of relief. I pulled into my driveway, the engine sighing in protest. As I killed the ignition, my gaze drifted across the street, a habit ingrained by weeks of quiet observation. And then I saw it. At 6:12 p.m., exactly on time, Mr. Abernathy's silver sedan was pulling into his driveway. The garage door was already rising. He exited the car, walked into the house, and the door descended. The entire sequence unfolded with the same flawless, unhurried precision I had witnessed countless times before. My breath caught in my throat. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile what I had just seen with the reality of the citywide paralysis. It was impossible. Utterly, unequivocally impossible. There was no route, no secret tunnel, no magical shortcut that could have allowed him to traverse the city's choked veins and arrive home at that exact moment. The traffic had been absolute, a solid, unmoving wall of metal. I had been in it. Everyone had been in it, except Mr. Abernathy. The unease that had been a whisper now became a roar. It wasn't just a quirk. It was a profound, terrifying anomaly. The man was not merely punctual. He was outside the laws of physics, outside the very fabric of reality as I understood it. Sleep that night was elusive. My mind raced, replaying the image of his car, the precise timing, the impossible arrival. The next morning, I watched him leave at 7:58 a.m., the same neutral expression on his face. He seemed utterly oblivious to the chaos of the previous day, to the lingering tension in the air, to the gnawing question that had taken root in my soul. My casual observation transformed into a full-blown obsession. I began to keep a detailed log, noting every entry and exit, every lawn mowing session. I cross-referenced it with news reports, traffic updates, even weather patterns. The results were always the same: flawless, unwavering, impossible. I started to devise tests, small, subtle attempts to disrupt his routine. One morning, I left my trash cans out an hour late, hoping he might pause, perhaps glance at them, a tiny crack in his perfect facade. He did not. His car backed out at 7:58 a.m., turning right, as if my errant bins were invisible. Another time, I had a package delivered precisely at 6:10 p.m., hoping the delivery driver might intersect with his arrival. The driver pulled away, and 2 minutes later, Mr. Abernathy's car glided into the driveway, undisturbed. The cul-de-sac, once a symbol of peace, began to feel like a stage, and Mr. Abernathy, the lead actor in a bizarre, unsettling play. I had to know. I had to understand. My spying became more direct, more desperate. I bought a pair of binoculars, telling my wife they were for birdwatching, that the only bird I was interested in was the one that never ruffled a feather. I watched his house for hours, looking for any sign of life beyond the robotic routine. Lights came on and went off at predictable times. The television, if it was on, produced no discernible sound. There were no visitors, no repairmen, no deliveries beyond the occasional mail. One evening, I decided to take a risk. My wife was out visiting her sister, and the street was particularly quiet. Mr. Abernathy had returned at 6:12 p.m., and the house had gone dark by 10:00 p.m. as usual. Armed with a flashlight and a pounding heart, I crept across the street, keeping to the shadows. My intention was simply to get a closer look, to peer through a window, to find some clue, any clue, to the enigma that was Mr. Abernathy. I reached his front porch, the silence of the night amplifying the thumping of my own pulse. The blinds were drawn tight on the front windows, as always. I moved to the side of the house, where a large bay window looked out onto the side yard. The curtains were slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. Taking a deep breath, I pressed my face against the cool glass. cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the ambient light. My heart hammered against my ribs. What would I see? A man sitting alone in a perfectly ordered room. Something far more sinister. What I saw was nothing. Not nothing in the sense of darkness, but nothing in the sense of emptiness. The room was bare. No furniture, no lamps, no decorations. Just dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering in from the streetlights. The walls were a sterile, unblemished off-white. The floor was polished hardwood, reflecting the faint glow like a still pond. It was a void. I moved to the next window, then the next, peering into each one. The dining room, the kitchen, the living room, all were utterly, completely empty. No appliances, no cabinets, no chairs, no table. It was as if the house had never been lived in. A display home stripped bare after the sale. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, far more chilling than any ghost story. I backed away from the house, stumbling slightly, my mind struggling to process the impossible sight. Where did he go when he entered? Where did he sit? Where did he sleep? What did he do in that hollow shell of a home? The implications were staggering, horrifying. Mr. Abernathy was not a person who lived in that house. He was a component of the house, or perhaps the house was a component of him. He was a function, a routine made flesh. His purpose wasn't to live, it was to appear to live. I returned to my own home, the familiar comfort of its walls now feeling like a flimsy illusion. The quiet hum of Elmwood Drive, once so soothing, now seemed like the low thrum of a machine, endlessly repeating its programmed cycle. Mr. Abernathy was not a neighbor. He was a placeholder, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to maintain the veneer of normalcy in our quiet cul-de-sac. He was the perfect suburbanite because he was nothing but the suburbanite. He embodied the routine, the predictable rhythm, the very essence of what Elmwood Drive was supposed to be, and the most terrifying thought of all. If he was a placeholder, what did that make the rest of us? Were we, too, merely actors in a grander, more elaborate performance? Our lives dictated by an unseen script, our deviations merely tolerated anomalies in a world striving for perfect, terrifying order. I still live at number 14 Elmwood Drive, and every morning at 7:58 a.m., I watch Mr. Abernathy's silver sedan back out of his driveway. Every evening at 6:12 p.m., I watch it return. And every Saturday at 10:00 a.m., I hear the hum of his mower. The perfection of it no longer amuses me. It chills me to the core, because I know, with a certainty that haunts my waking hours and invades my dreams, that the man in the cul-de-sac is not living. He is simply performing, a silent, unwavering sentinel of an illusion, and I am trapped within its perfectly orchestrated, utterly hollow embrace. 8th story, the Argent tapes. The dust in the old Ashworth Asylum was a living thing, thick and gray, stirred into lazy eddies by my every breath. I'm an urban explorer, you see, not for the thrill of vandalism or the cheap rush of breaking in. No, for me, it's about history, the echoes of lives lived, the stories whispered by decaying architecture. Ashworth, though, had always felt different, heavier. I'd been through the main wards, the kitchen, even the padded cells on the 3rd floor. But the basement, for some reason, had always eluded me. The access door was hidden behind a collapsed section of wall in the laundry room, like the building itself was trying to keep its secrets buried. This time, armed with a stronger crowbar and an almost obsessive determination, I finally forced my way in. The air down there was colder, denser, carrying the metallic tang of damp earth, and something else, something faintly acrid, like old ozone or forgotten medicine. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating skeletal pipes and water-damaged boxes. Most were filled with moldy patient files or rusted medical instruments. Then, tucked away in a shadowed alcove, beneath a collapsed shelf, I found it. A wooden crate, remarkably preserved, with a brass clasp that yielded with a protesting squeal. Inside were not books or instruments, but an assortment of cylindrical canisters and small, rectangular boxes. Film reels, 16 by the look of them, and audio tapes, all neatly labeled. My heart gave a little thump. This was the real treasure. Each label, meticulously handwritten in a looping, elegant script, read, Argent Therapy Sessions, 1958. Argent Silver. The name resonated with a strange, almost archaic quality. I carefully packed the box, the weight of the old media feeling significant in my hands, and made my way out of the asylum. Restoring old film and audio is a painstaking process. The film was brittle, the audio tapes warped. It took weeks of delicate work, cleaning, splicing, digitizing. The first few film reels were unremarkable. Grainy black and white footage, mostly silent, showing empty corridors, or the sun-drenched, overgrown courtyard of the asylum. The corresponding audio tapes were often just static, or the faint hum of old electrical equipment. I was beginning to think I'd simply found some forgotten institutional archives. Then I got to the therapy sessions. The first film, labeled Session 1A, Patient 7, began with a slow pan across a small, sparsely furnished room. The walls were painted a muted gray. In the center, a single high-backed wooden chair, and all around it, positioned at various angles, were mirrors. Not modern, clear glass. These were antique, with ornate, tarnished silver frames, their surfaces reflecting the room with a peculiar, almost milky quality. Argent. The film was silent, but the accompanying audio tape, though crackly, offered the first true insight. A man's voice, cultured and precise, filled the room. This was Dr. Alistair Finch, according to the case notes I later found. The human psyche, Finch began, his voice calm, almost meditative, with a subtle hiss of tape degradation underneath, is a complex tapestry, woven with threads both desired and undesired. What if the threads we seek to sever, the maladies that plague us, the unwanted self, could be given form, could be drawn out? A pause, filled with the soft rustle of the tape. My hypothesis, supported by preliminary observations, suggests that a controlled environment, coupled with specific reflective surfaces, specifically argent mirrors, known for their unique properties of capturing and holding light, can act as a conduit. A vessel, if you will. He went on to describe his argent therapy. Patients would sit in this mirrored room, instructed to simply gaze at their own reflection, to confront their inner turmoil. The mirrors, he theorized, would not simply reflect. they would absorb. They would draw out the unwanted self, trapping it within their silvered depths, leaving the patient unburdened. It sounded fantastical, dangerous even. But this was 1958, and psychiatric methods were still, in many ways, an unproven frontier. The film then showed Patient 7, a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, dressed in a simple institution gown. She sat in the chair, her expression vacant, almost resigned. She gazed into one of the mirrors directly in front of her. The film quality, despite my efforts, was still imperfect. There were lines of static that flickered across the screen, momentary distortions that made the image waver. The audio was filled with the low hum of the recording equipment and the occasional faint creak of the chair. For nearly an hour of footage, she simply sat, blinked. Her breath fogged the mirror slightly with each exhale. It was tedious. I almost turned it off. Then I saw it. It was subtle at first, a flicker. The patient blinked, her eyes closing for a fraction of a second. But her reflection in the mirror, it didn't blink. Its eyes remained open, staring, just for a heartbeat. Then it blinked, perfectly in sync. I rewinded the digital file, played it again. Slowly, frame by frame, there it was. A tiny, almost imperceptible delay. A hesitation. It was so brief, so easily dismissed as a technical glitch, a film artifact. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The next tapes and films amplified this unsettling phenomenon. Session 3B, Patient 12. A man older with a perpetual tremor in his hands. He wept silently, tears tracking paths down his cheeks. His reflection, though, was unsettlingly still. Its face, though wet, held no sorrow. It was impassive. And then, as the patient's shoulders shook with a sob, his reflection smiled. A thin, cruel curl of the lips. The patient didn't see it. He was too consumed by his own grief. But it was there, clear as day, on the grainy film. The hair on my arms stood on end. Session 5A, Patient 9. A woman, restless, constantly shifting in her chair, her eyes darting around the room, never settling on a single point. But her reflection, it remained fixed, its eyes locked onto the viewer. A steady, unblinking gaze that felt unnervingly personal. The audio log for this session featured Dr. Finch's voice, a slight tremor now audible in his precise delivery. Remarkable. The manifestations are becoming more pronounced. The unwanted self appears to be asserting its independence within the reflective plane. We are witnessing, I believe, a nascent consciousness, or perhaps a parasitic one. He spoke of the reflections as having their own agency, their own desires. It was a chilling thought. This wasn't therapy. It was an extraction. And what was being extracted was still alive. I watched more tapes. Each one deepened the unease. The reflections grew bolder. A patient would scratch their nose, but their reflection would rake its fingernails across its cheek, leaving invisible marks. A patient would sigh with exhaustion, and their reflection would yawn, revealing a mouth full of oddly sharp, elongated teeth. The static on the film seemed to grow more frequent, more intense, sometimes obscuring the reflections, just as they performed their most aberrant acts, as if the very medium was struggling to contain what it was showing. Dr. Finch's audio logs became increasingly agitated. His scientific detachment began to crack, replaced by a growing sense of awe. And then, fear. The mimicry is breaking down. The reflections, they are no longer simply twisted versions of the patients. They are becoming distinct entities. They are looking back. He described moments when he entered the mirrored room to find reflections already present in the mirrors, even when no patient was seated in the chair. He theorized that these were the trapped maladies of previous patients, now coalescing, strengthening within the silver. He spoke of seeing their eyes follow him as he moved, their mouths form silent, taunting words. The last film reel, labeled Final Observation, Dr. Finch, was different. The room was empty. The chair sat vacant. The mirrors gleamed under the harsh, unblinking light. The film quality was remarkably clear, almost pristine for the first few minutes. No static, no visual distortions, just the silent, empty room. I waited, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. What would it show? Would Dr. Finch himself appear? Then the audio log began. Dr. Finch's voice, but it was no longer suave or precise. It was trembling, ragged, bordering on a raw whisper. The crackle of the tape beneath his voice was constant, like 1,000 insects scuttling. They know I'm here. They know I'm watching. His breath hitched, a faint sob escaping his lips. Even without a subject, they are there. In the silver, I see them. The film remained focused on the empty room, the silent mirrors. But now I saw it. A faint shimmer, a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt, but within the mirror itself. The very edge of a dark shape. Their eyes, they are not human, not anymore. They are hungry. Finch's voice was breaking now, a high, thin sound of terror. They want out. They want me. Suddenly, the film image distorted violently. A cascade of static, a kaleidoscope of black and white noise. For a split second, though through the chaos, I caught it. A glimpse. In one of the large mirrors, just before the screen dissolved into pure visual snow, a face. Not a reflection of anyone in the room. Not human. A gaunt, elongated visage, with eyes that burned with a cold, malevolent light, and a mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. And it was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. Then silence. The film ended. The audio tape ran out with a final, dying hiss. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the faint hum of my computer, the only sound. The Argent tapes. They weren't just recordings of old therapy sessions. They were a window into something that had been drawn out, nurtured, and then, inexplicably, given life within the silver depths of those mirrors. And what had happened to Dr. Finch, alone in that room, facing what he had unleashed? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I still have the original reels and tapes. They sit in a lead-lined box in the darkest corner of my storage unit. I haven't watched them again. I can't. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the light is just so, I catch my own reflection in a window or a polished surface. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I wonder if the eyes looking back are truly my own. 9th story, where the woods fall silent. The ancient woods of Oakhaven National Park have always held a peculiar reputation. Not for monstrous beasts or spectral apparitions, but for something far more subtle, far more unsettling: the silent patches. Locals, for generations, have whispered about them, avoiding certain trails, certain valleys, speaking of places where the very air swallowed sound. As a park ranger with a background in acoustic ecology, these legends were, to me, fascinating anomalies, ripe for scientific inquiry. My name is Elias Thorne, and my assignment to Oak Haven felt like a homecoming. I'd spent years studying the intricate symphony of nature, the delicate balance of calls and echoes that define a healthy ecosystem. But Oak Haven's silent patches defied every principle I understood. Imagine standing in a forest, deep in its emerald embrace, where no bird sings, no cicada hums, no breeze whispers through the leaves. Even the crunch of your own boots on the forest floor seems to vanish, absorbed by an unseen force. It was less a lack of sound and more a profound absence, a palpable void that pressed in on your eardrums. My initial forays into the smaller, more accessible silent patches were cautious, methodical. I deployed an array of sophisticated sound meters and recorders, hopping to capture the frequency, the decibel level, anything that could offer a clue. The data, at first, was perplexing. It wasn't simply a flat line. There was a low, almost imperceptible hum, a steady thrum that defied classification. It was as if the air itself was vibrating at a frequency just beyond the range of human hearing, a frequency that actively dampened all other sounds. My equipment struggled to register even my own voice within these zones, showing wildly fluctuating decibel readings that often dipped into negative numbers. It was as if the very acoustic energy was being siphoned away, absorbed by something unknown. The largest of these anomalies was known to the old-timers as the Deadman's Gulch Silent Zone. Its reputation was formidable, even among the most seasoned rangers. No one went there alone, and even in groups, a strange unease permeated the air, forcing whispered conversations and hasty retreats. Naturally, it became my primary focus. I prepared meticulously for my expedition into Deadman's Gulch. My pack was laden with extra batteries, high-gain microphones, and a specialized, experimental sound recorder designed to detect infrasound frequencies below the human hearing threshold. I also carried a small, portable speaker capable of generating white noise at various frequencies, a crude but effective tool for testing the environment's acoustic properties. The journey to the perimeter of Deadman's Gulch was unremarkable. The familiar sounds of the forest accompanied me, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant caw of a crow, the gentle sigh of the wind through the pines. But as I approached the boundary, marked by a subtle shift in the density of the foliage and a peculiar, almost metallic scent in the air, the symphony began to fade. The bird calls grew distant, then vanished entirely. The wind, though still stirring the branches above, made no sound against the leaves. It was as if a giant hand had reached down and muted the world. Stepping into the Deadman's Gulch Silent Zone was an experience unlike any other. The air itself felt thicker, heavier, pressing against my eardrums. I could feel my own heartbeat, a dull throb in my chest, disproportionately loud in the profound stillness. I set up my first array of sensors, carefully positioning them to capture any subtle shifts in the acoustic landscape. The sound meters immediately registered the same baffling results as before: the inexplicable hum, the erratic decibel readings that plummeted into the abyss of negative numbers. I began my methodical walk deeper into the gulch, the silence growing more profound with every step. I tried speaking, my voice feeling strangely hollow, as if the sound waves were being ripped from my throat the moment they emerged. The white noise generator, when activated, produced only a weak, fluttering hiss, quickly swallowed by the oppressive quiet. It was like shouting into a pillow, but a pillow that stretched for acres. As I ventured further, a new, unsettling phenomenon began to manifest. My own sounds, once so prominent in the silent expanse, began to attenuate. The crunch of my boots on the mossy ground, initially a faint whisper, grew fainter still, until it was barely perceptible. My own breathing, once a rhythmic counterpoint to the thumping of my heart, became thin and reedy, as if the air itself was resisting its passage. It was a terrifying form of sensory deprivation, as if the world was slowly stripping away my connection to it, leaving me adrift in a silent, suffocating void. Scientific detachment I prided myself on began to fray. The rational explanations, the theories of unique geological formations or atmospheric anomalies, seemed utterly inadequate in the face of this living, breathing silence. It wasn't just an absence, it was an active presence, something that consumed sound, that thrived on its negation. The inexplicable hum, which my infrasound detector was now picking up with increasing clarity, seemed to pulsate, almost like a slow, deliberate breath. I found myself slowing my pace, my movements becoming more deliberate, more hesitant. Each step felt like a trespass, an intrusion into a sacred, silent space. The hair on my arms stood on end, not from cold, but from an instinctual dread. I felt observed, not by eyes, but by a form of perception that hunted through the very fabric of sound. The realization struck me with a chilling clarity that stole my breath. What if this silence wasn't a passive phenomenon, but an active predator? What if it hunted not by sight or smell, but by sound, and I, with my beating heart and ragged breath, was its prey? The thought, once planted, took root and blossomed into a suffocating terror. Every faint sound I made felt like a beacon, a signal to whatever entity resided in this profound quiet. I tried to be quieter, to minimize my footsteps, to shallow my breathing. But the silence seemed to grow hungrier, more insistent. It was no longer just dampening my sounds, it was actively devouring them. I could feel my voice, when I dared to utter a word, being compressed, stifled, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my vocal cords. The air around me felt like a dense, viscous fluid, resisting all acoustic vibrations. My experimental sound recorder, the one designed for infrasound, began to pick up something else, something far more disturbing than the low hum. It was a rhythmic, almost predatory pulse, growing stronger, closer. It was a sound that existed beyond the realm of human hearing, yet I could feel it, a resonance in my bones, a vibration in my very soul. It was the heartbeat of the silence, and it was growing louder. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I needed to get out, to escape this living void. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, but the oppressive silence seemed to disorient me. The trees all looked the same, shrouded in a uniform, sound-deadening cloak. My sense of direction, so keen in the noisy world, faltered. I stumbled forward, my movements clumsy and loud in the context of the suffocating quiet. Each rustle of my clothes, each heavy breath, felt like a trumpet blast in a silent cathedral. The pulse, the infrasonic heartbeat, intensified, vibrating through the ground, through the air, directly into my chest. It felt like a low, resonant growl, a silent roar that vibrated deep within me. Then a new sensation. The silence itself seemed to compress, not just my sounds, but my very being. The air felt heavy, dense, as if it were actively trying to crush me. My eardrums ached with the pressure, a dull, throbbing pain. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a complete severance from the world, beyond this terrifying pocket of nothingness. I could no longer hear my own footsteps. I could no longer hear my own ragged breathing, though my lungs burned for air. The only sound, if it could be called that, was the deep, resonant pulse, now a deafening thrum that seemed to fill every inch of my being. It was the sound of a vast, unseen entity, sensing me, closing in, ready to consume not just my sound, but me entirely. The last thing I remember, before the all-encompassing darkness took hold, was the sensation of the air growing thin, of my own voice, when I tried to scream, being utterly, perfectly silenced. And the thrumming, the endless, hungry thrumming, growing ever so close. The woods, in that moment, had fallen silent, and in their silence, they had devoured me. 10th story, the night librarian's index. The silence of the university library at night was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, but rather a vast, breathing quiet, filled with the soft rustle of ancient paper, the creak of settling wood, and the distant hum of unseen ventilation systems. Elias Thorne had come to know this silence intimately over the past few weeks. His new job, the sole night clerk in the sprawling, labyrinthine university library, was deceptively simple. Reshelve the books left on tables and in return carts by the day's scholars. He was a student himself, though his studies felt a world away in these nocturnal hours. By day, the library buzzed with the intellectual fervor of hundreds, a vibrant hub of research and learning. By night, it transformed into a colossal, silent sentinel, its towering shelves reaching into shadows that the fluorescent lights couldn't quite banish. Elias was alone, truly alone, amidst millions of printed pages, each one a whisper from the past. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper, dust, and something else, something indefinable, like forgotten knowledge or hushed secrets. His routine was methodical. He'd start on the ground floor, pushing his cart, its wheels a soft counterpoint to the library's deep quiet. He'd gather the scattered volumes, sort them by call number, and then embark on his journey through the stacks. The library was a maze of endless corridors, each lined with identical, imposing shelves. The higher floors were even quieter, the light dimmer, the air cooler. Sometimes, a sudden draft would stir the pages of an open book, making it seem as though an unseen reader had just turned away. One Tuesday night, as the clock on his phone ticked past 2 in the morning, Elias found himself in the fiction section, a place he rarely frequented. Most students preferred to read their novels at home. He pushed his cart down an aisle, his flashlight beam dancing over titles, when a particularly thick, leather-bound volume caught his eye. It lay open on a reading table, starkly out of place. It wasn't a novel. He picked it up. The cover was worn, the title embossed in faded gold. Anatomy and Physiology of the Human Form, Volume III. Below it, a date, 1887. Elias frowned. A 19th century anatomy textbook in the contemporary fiction section. It was an odd misplacement, even for a tired student. He flipped through its heavy pages, intending to close it and place it on his cart. But then he saw the page it was open to. It was a detailed, hand-drawn diagram of the human heart. His gaze sharpened, drawn to a specific anomaly depicted with precise, almost unsettling clarity. A rare congenital heart defect, a complex malformation of the aortic valve, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. His father had that exact defect. Elias had seen similar diagrams in medical journals his father kept, diagrams that mirrored this one with uncanny precision. He stared at the illustration, then at the surrounding fiction shelves. It had to be a coincidence, a bizarre, unsettling coincidence. He closed the book, its leather cover cool beneath his fingers, and placed it carefully on his cart, making a mental note to check its proper section later. The silence of the library seemed to press in on him, no longer a comforting quiet, but something heavy and watchful. The following night, the unsettling pattern continued. Elias was in the philosophy section, a place usually populated by dense, abstract texts. On a low, dusty table, amidst a pile of Kant and Nietzsche, lay a brightly colored paperback, Disasters at Sea, a chronicle of 20th century maritime tragedies. The cover depicted a stormy ocean, a ship listing dangerously. This was even more out of place than the anatomy book. He picked it up, a prickle of unease running down his spine. The book was open, a faded bookmark tucked between two pages. He pulled the bookmark out, his eyes scanning the text it had marked. It was a detailed account of the sinking of the SS Albatross, a cargo ship that had gone down in the North Atlantic in the winter of 1978. The article listed the names of the crew and passengers lost. And there, halfway down the list, was a name that made his breath catch. Arthur Thorne, his uncle, his father's younger brother, lost at sea before Elias was even born. A family tragedy spoken of in hushed tones. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's cool air. This wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. The first time, he could dismiss it as a strange happenstance. Twice, with such specific and personal details, felt like something else entirely. It felt deliberate. He looked around the vast, dimly lit room, a sudden, irrational fear blooming in his chest. Was someone playing a cruel prank? But who? He was the only one here at night. And how could anyone know such intimate details about his family? He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps someone had been researching his family history and left the books. But the anatomy textbook was ancient, not something easily found or casually left. And the maritime book was in the philosophy section. It made no sense. He felt a creeping sensation, as if the very walls of the library were aware of him, of his history, of the secrets he carried. The silence now felt like a held breath. Over the next few nights, the incidents escalated, becoming more personal, more immediate. He found a children's book on a high shelf in the astrophysics section, its pages open to a drawing of a small, red bicycle. It was the exact bicycle he'd received for his 7th birthday, the one he'd crashed, breaking his arm, in the rare manuscripts division. A collection of local newspaper clippings from the 1990s lay open on a page, detailing a small, forgotten fire at a local bakery. The same bakery his grandmother had owned, the one that had burned down just weeks before her passing. Each discovery was a punch to the gut, a cold, knowing touch from an unseen hand. Elias began to feel a profound sense of dread every time he started his shift. The library, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a vast, echoing chamber of his own past, a repository not just of universal knowledge, but of his own intimate, hidden history. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions. How? Why? Who was doing this? Or more terrifyingly, what was doing this? He found himself talking to the empty shelves, whispering questions into the vastness, his voice swallowed by the silence. "What do you want?" he'd murmur, his breath fogging slightly in the cool air. The only answer was the deep, resonant quiet of the building itself, a silence that seemed to hum with an ancient, knowing intelligence. He started to believe the library wasn't just a building. It was a living entity, vast and impersonal, and it was indexing him. The feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. He would glance over his shoulder, convinced he saw a shadow shift in the periphery of his vision, or heard a faint rustle of pages from an aisle he had just cleared. His sleep became restless, haunted by dreams of endless corridors and whispering books. He considered quitting, but a strange, morbid curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of inevitability, kept him coming back. He felt compelled to see where this unsettling game would lead. Then came the night of the central event, a night etched into his memory with the sharpness of a freshly cut page. It was Thursday, a few minutes past midnight. Elias was working his way through the cartography section, a sprawling area filled with ancient maps, atlases, and navigational charts. The air here felt particularly dry, smelling faintly of parchment and old ink. He was collecting a stack of oversized maps left on a large oak table when his hand brushed against something hidden beneath them. It was a book, not a map, not an atlas, but a book. It was unlike any other volume he had encountered in the library. It was unindexed, with no call number on its spine. It was bound in dark, unadorned leather, so dark it seemed to absorb the dim light. There was no title on the spine, no author's name. It was simply a blank, dark rectangle. He pulled it out from under the maps. It felt heavy, denser than its size suggested, almost as if it contained a compressed history. He turned it over in his hands, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The front cover was also blank, smooth and unblemished. But then, as his fingers traced the surface, he felt something, embossed, almost imperceptibly, into the leather. He angled it under his flashlight, and the faint impression became clear. It was text, pressed into the leather, dark on dark, almost invisible unless caught by the light just right. And the text was his name. His full name, Elias Thorne. The air in the cartography section seemed to grow impossibly cold, stealing the breath from his lungs. His own name, on a book that shouldn't exist, a book that was unindexed, hidden. Every hair on his arms stood on end. This was it. This was the culmination of all the strange, personal discoveries. The library wasn't just showing him his past. It was presenting him with something new, something directly tied to him, and him alone. His hand trembled as he held the book. A profound sense of terror, mixed with an almost irresistible urge, washed over him. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this book held the key. It was the library's ultimate revelation, its final, terrifying index. He stood there for a long moment, the silence of the vast library pressing in on him, amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. The glow of his flashlight seemed to shrink, creating a small, isolated bubble around him and the dark, personal volume. He could hear the blood rushing in his ears, a counterpoint to the deep, ancient hum of the building. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to throw the book away, to flee this place and never look back. But another, more powerful force, a morbid fascination, held him rooted. He had to know. Slowly, his fingers, cold and stiff, moved to the edge of the leather cover. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of old paper and dust filling his nostrils. The weight of the book in his hands felt immense, as though it contained not just paper, but the very fabric of his existence. He opened the book. The pages inside were thick, creamy white, and utterly blank. Page after page, pristine and empty, stretching into an unknown future. His gaze swept across them, a wave of confusion, then relief, then a deeper, more profound dread washing over him. Blank. It was all blank. But then his eyes fell upon the very first page. It wasn't blank. At the top, neatly inscribed in a precise, almost elegant script, was today's date. The date of this very night. And below it, a single sentence. He opens the book. The words seem to leap off the page, not just ink on paper, but a direct, chilling observation. A statement of fact, recorded precisely at the moment he performed the action. It wasn't a prediction, not a prophecy. It was a record of something that was happening right now as he read it. Elias stared at the sentence, his mind reeling. The library knew. It hadn't just shown him his past, it was documenting his present in real time. It was an intelligence, vast and impersonal, that not only knew him, but was actively indexing his life, moment by moment. The blank pages that followed stretched out, a terrifying void waiting to be filled with the unwritten chapters of his existence, chapters that the library, it seemed, already knew. The silence of the library no longer felt like a held breath. It felt like a vast, knowing sigh. Elias Thorne stood in the dim light of the cartography section, the leather-bound book with his name on its cover held open in his trembling hands, and understood with a crushing certainty that he was merely a character in a story already written, a story indexed and filed away in the endless, silent archives of the night library. The fear of the unknown was replaced by the far more terrifying fear of the known, of a predetermined path, meticulously recorded, page by blank page, waiting for him to live it And the library, ancient and all-knowing, was merely turning the pages. 11th story, the slow crawl. It began, as most things do, imperceptibly. A small, dark pinprick on the inner forearm, just above the wrist. I noticed it while idly tracing the lines of my palm. A momentary distraction during a particularly tedious online meeting. It was, I assumed, a new freckle. Nothing more. My skin, like many, is dotted with them. A constellation of small, benign specks. This one, however, possessed a depth, a richness of color that set it apart. It was a perfect, inky circle. A tiny midnight sun on the pale landscape of my skin. The first hint of unease didn't arrive with the initial sighting, but a day later. I was showering, and my gaze, for reasons I couldn't articulate, drifted to the freckle. It was still there, of course, but something felt off. It was almost imperceptible, a whisper of a shift, but my mind, ever the meticulous record keeper, registered it. It seemed fractionally higher than I remembered. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, or perhaps, more likely, a faulty memory. After all, who truly memorizes the precise location of every new freckle? Yet the thought lingered, a tiny splinter beneath the skin of my consciousness. The next morning, as the weak light of dawn filtered through my blinds, I found myself examining my arm with a newfound intensity. The freckle was undeniably there, and it was, I swore, higher. A millimeter, perhaps two. It was the kind of difference that would typically go unnoticed, easily attributed to an optical illusion or the subtle movements of skin. But something in the back of my mind, a cold, insistent voice, told me otherwise. This was the beginning of the documentation. I retrieved a fine-tipped pen from my desk drawer. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, I drew a tiny, barely visible circle around the freckle. Then, I took a photograph with my phone, a close-up, ensuring the pen mark was clear. I made a note, a simple date and time. This was, I told myself, purely for my own peace of mind. To prove to myself that I was mistaken, that my imagination was simply playing tricks. The following morning, the evidence was undeniable. The freckle had moved. It sat now just outside the perimeter of the faint circle I had drawn. The migration was slight, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but to me, it was a seismic shift. My heart, for the first time, quickened, not in panic, not yet. More in a kind of disbelieving fascination, a chilling curiosity. I repeated the ritual, a new circle, a new photograph, a new note. The direction of movement was consistent. Always upward, always away from my wrist, always toward my elbow. Days bled into a week. The routine became ingrained. Each morning, before even the first sip of coffee, I would examine my arm. The pen marks, a series of increasingly higher and higher concentric circles, became a macabre roadmap of its progress. Each new circle was a fresh jolt of something cold and unsettling. The freckle, this tiny, dark entity, was not static. It was moving, deliberately. I showed it to Sarah, my partner. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. "It's just a freckle, honey," she said, her voice soft, reassuring. "Maybe it's just your skin stretching, or you're holding your arm differently each time." She examined it closely, turning my arm this way and that. "I don't see it moving. It looks exactly where it was." I pointed to the faint pen marks, the ghost of my previous anxieties. She squinted. "Those are so faint, I can barely see them." Are you sure you're not just imagining it? Her words, intended to soothe, had the opposite effect. They ignited a spark of fear, a different kind of terror than the one caused by the moving freckle. The fear of isolation, the fear of being disbelieved. I tried to explain the meticulousness of my observations, the photographic evidence. But even as I spoke, the words felt hollow, inadequate. How do you convey the chilling certainty of something that is, by its very nature, almost invisible? How do you make someone else see what you see when it's a matter of millimeters, of a conviction that feels both utterly rational and utterly insane? My friends, when I cautiously brought it up, reacted similarly. Bemused smiles, gentle suggestions of stress, of needing a break. Maybe you're just a little too focused on it, Mark offered, his tone kind but dismissive. I mean, it's just a little spot, right? Our bodies change all the time. I saw a doctor, Dr. Albright, a kind, older woman with a perpetually harried expression. I laid out my case, the photographs, the meticulous notes, the pen marks on my arm. She listened, nodding occasionally, her gaze flicking between my arm and my face. She examined the freckle under a magnifying lamp. She gently palpated the surrounding skin. It looks like a benign mole, she concluded, her voice calm and professional. Nothing to be concerned about. As for it moving, well, our skin is always shifting, stretching. Sometimes moles can appear to change shape or position due to those natural movements, or even just how the light hits them. She recommended a dermatologist if I was still concerned, but her tone clearly indicated she believed this was an unnecessary step. A worried patient, nothing more. A case of mild health anxiety. I left her office feeling a profound sense of despair. They didn't see it. They couldn't see it. The horror was mine alone, a secret tenant in my own skin. But the freckle continued its slow crawl. Every morning, the same ritual. The same faint line drawn, the same photograph taken. The trajectory was unwavering. Upward, always upward. It had crossed the midpoint of my forearm, now inching closer to my elbow. The color, too, seemed to intensify, a richer, deeper black against my skin. It was no longer a pinprick. It was a tiny, perfect sphere, a bead of solidified darkness. My sleep became fractured, haunted by waking nightmares of its relentless ascent. I would wake in a cold sweat, immediately reaching for my arm, tracing the path it had already taken. I started to feel a subtle, almost imperceptible warmth emanating from it, a faint pulse that was more felt than heard. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that this was not a benign freckle. The isolation became a constant companion. How do you live with a secret horror that only you can perceive? How do you maintain a semblance of normalcy when a part of your own body is behaving in a way that defies all known biological laws? Sarah grew increasingly concerned, not about the freckle, but about me. My withdrawn nature, my obsessive checks, the dark circles under my eyes. She suggested therapy. "It's okay to feel anxious, honey," she'd say, her voice laced with a gentle desperation. "But you're letting this consume you." I tried to explain, to make her understand the sheer terror of not knowing what was happening to my own body, of feeling utterly helpless, utterly alone in the face of an encroaching, unseen threat. But the words always fell flat. How can you describe the feeling of a tiny, black orb subtly, relentlessly migrating across your flesh, when the very notion sounds like a delusion. The freckle was now just below my elbow, its progress methodical, unyielding. I could feel it, almost, as it moved. A faint, internal friction, like a microscopic grain of sand being pulled through soft tissue. Or was that just my imagination? A desperate attempt to externalize the horror that was, in truth, entirely internal. The terror wasn't just about the freckle itself, but about what it represented. Was it a parasite, slowly burrowing its way deeper? A living, growing entity feeding on me from within? Or was it something far more insidious, a symptom of a deeper, more profound unraveling of my own mind? The thought that I might be delusional, that my perception of reality was fracturing, was almost as terrifying as the moving speck itself. One morning, I woke to a new sensation, a faint, almost imperceptible throbbing around the freckle. It was not painful, not exactly. More like a dull ache, a low hum beneath the skin. And when I looked, the freckle was no longer a perfect circle. A faint, almost invisible tendril, a delicate filament of darkness, seemed to extend from its edge, pointing ever so slightly upward toward my shoulder. My breath hitched. This was new. This was a change in form, not just position. It was no longer merely moving, it was growing, evolving. I picked up the pen, but my hand was shaking so violently, I almost dropped it. I drew a new circle, encompassing the new, faint tendril. The photograph I took was blurry, a testament to the tremor that had seized me. The journey continued. Up my bicep, a slow, inch-by-inch ascent. The tendril became more pronounced, a tiny, dark root extending from the main body of the freckle. It was no longer just a dot. It was a minuscule, creeping thing, an arrow pointing to its ultimate destination. The sense of utter helplessness was overwhelming. I was a passenger in my own body, watching a horrifying, slow-motion invasion. I stopped trying to explain it to Sarah. The blank stares, the worried glances, the gentle pleas for me to seek help, they had become unbearable. I retreated further into myself, into the silent, terrifying world where only the freckle and I existed. Now it is at my shoulder. I can feel its weight, its presence, more acutely than before. The throb is more constant, a low, persistent pulse beneath the skin. The tendril is clearer, darker, a miniature root system extending across the curve of my shoulder, pointing directly toward my neck. I spend my days in a quiet despair, watching, waiting. The horror is no longer a jolt of fear, but a dull, constant ache, a cold certainty. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. I only know that it is coming, and no one else can see it. No one else believes me. The silence of their disbelief is almost as chilling as the slow, inexorable crawl of the thing on my arm. The feeling of being completely, utterly alone with this unseen, unbelievable horror is a torment that surpasses even the fear of what the freckle might eventually do. I can feel it now, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth radiating from my shoulder, a tiny beacon of an unimaginable process. It is almost at my neck, and I am left with only the terrible, cold comfort of its undeniable presence, a terrifying proof of a reality that only I am cursed to witness. the slow crawl continues, and I am simply waiting for it to reach its destination. Conclusion. And with that, our time together for tonight comes to close. For those of you still with me, here in the deep of the night, I'm curious, what image or thought from these accounts will stick with you as you drift away? Feel free to share it below. Until we speak again, I wish you peace and sweet dreams.